All right, welcome everybody. I'm happy to join you today. My name is Julie Everett. I'm with a company called Clearly Agile in typically sunny Florida. Been working with Fanatics since last year and just delighted to be here with you today to talk about teaming agreements.
Hi everyone, I'm also with Clearly Agile out of Tampa, Florida, and have been in the Agile space for the past 12 years plus and 25 plus years in general software development. So happy to meet everyone and participate today.
I think that we make a good combination. My expertise really is in product coaching, product organizations, and Rob, the business side of Agile, if you will, and Rob leans in from the people side of Agile. So this is one of those areas that involves the whole team, and excited to have us pairing in together on this and getting a little bit of color from both sides of the Agile fence, if you will. We're going to dive right in, talking a little bit about why in the world we would even need a teaming agreement. So this is just sort of an open mic question. You can go off mute. You can just give us a couple of answers to this question. If you were trying to design the perfect team, what would you be looking for?
Open us up. Agility.
Agility. Okay. What else?
Collaboration.
Collaboration. Okay.
Yeah.
Diverse personalities.
Diverse personalities. It's a good one.
Yep.
Anything specific about the team members themselves?
Cross-functional, product engineering, design.
Okay.
Functional, yeah.
Nice. Good
Yeah.
ad. Any others? What about skill sets or tenure?
Experience.
Experience? Any others?
It's a varied tenure.
Very tenure.
Very tenure.
Someone who knows what's going on, has been there forever, and someone who's brand new to put fresh eyes on. And someone in the middle, why not?
I love it. It's great. Any other ads? Nice. Well, it's interesting because you might think that you could sit down and design sort of the perfect team by thinking about all this diversity and all these qualities that you want to have together. If you could get the right combo of tenure and skills and personalities. And so sure, you could find individuals with these, especially among the teams that you have, but if you guessed that these were the qualities that were necessary for the building the best teams in the business, we would be wrong. We know this because one of the biggest, most influential companies in the world who loves data, anybody know which company I'm talking about? They love data. Google, who loves their data, decided they would sit down and design the perfect team. They're one of these high-performing teams. And since I'm telling you this story, you can probably guess, do you think they were successful?
Probably.
No.
They were not.
Oh.
And so they were really baffled. So they did this whole experiment. They put together this team. It wasn't what they would consider a successful team. So they embarked on a multi-year study, a 5-year study, studying 180 of their own teams. This is called Project Aristotle. And they really put together some of the most fascinating team data in sort of modern agile world that we have found that has been really useful for us to understand organizational team dynamics. What they found at the end of it, there was actually no perfect or predictable pattern or formula. You simply couldn't bring together the most qualified people and build a great team. But they did learn a pretty startling, simple ingredient to why some teams thrive and others do not. Any guesses?
Flexibility?
Could be a piece of it.
Mutual respect.
Mutual respect, that's a very big piece of it. And in fact, teams with the best team working agreements were the highest performing. So it turned out it didn't matter about personalities and tenure and expertise and all those things and division and diversity and all of those things. They ended up with a couple of really influential insights that we're going to unpack today as we go forward. The most important of it is that it's based in really strong team norms. So that's why we're here today, is just to unpack how to build good backbones to launch agile teams, or if you have something already, maybe we can inspire you to go a little bit further. Essentially, it's a living agreement between the team members. And we're going to talk about not just the different elements of it, but how we keep it refreshed and maintained. So we wanted to dissect that a little bit today. We've taken some of our experience with multiple different domains and companies and decades in the business. We've combined it with some of their findings, and we've distilled it down to several different elements, 4 different areas here that we're going to talk about today, and relate each one of them back to some of those elements that Google found were really important. So we've broken it down by product and users, quality expectations, team norms, pretty tactical, pretty down to earth team norms, and then how do we keep it relevant? How do we inspect and adapt this thing that we're building? So in general, it's like a game plan. It's a game plan for the team. It's a structured conversation. It takes a holistic approach. There's multiple pieces of that, and we're going to talk about how each one of these have something to contribute to creating this high-performing team. So let's take a look at each one of these areas. We're going to start with product and users. What's your team charter to do? So just as a way to get into this and start getting our conversation going, let's check in with our collaboration tool and just think about the team that you're working on right now. If you consider whatever it is that they're building is their team product, what is your product and who's benefiting from it? Let's see what your answers say.
Yeah, I was just saying, I work on MDM. Our team is super small right now. We just have 1 developer and 1 architect. So small team, but we're trying to have a big impact, so it's fun.
Who's your users?
Oh, awesome.
A lot of people within Fanatics. Currently, we work with a lot of CRM folks, and we're working with Fanatics brands, and so we're helping support the FAST project right now. So we have a lot of fires on different fronts that we're fighting, but yeah, it's fun.
Nice.
Oh,
Great.
nice.
Anybody else?
This is Casey Furlong. My product is Firefly. And our users are the Fanatics branded contractor network.
Art automation, design and art teams, quality control and licensing. Great. Get a couple more. So sometimes we think of our users, our main users, are the people who are benefiting just directly from the thing that we're building. But ultimately, we also want to make sure that we're in touch with the actual end user of our product. I might consider this analogy if I think about something like a furniture manufacturer. The furniture manufacturer might sell their own furniture, but they might also partner with distributors, some furniture store down the street or across the country. So that distributor would have their brand, but they might have other brands. So they may often consider that distributor their customer. But ultimately, if the users on the other side they stop buying that particular couch, that particular dining set, it's not the distributor that goes out of business, right? It's the furniture maker. And so one of the things that we want to make sure we do is to get in touch with our actual users. So this is really important because we get too far away with understanding the pain points of what our end users are using our product for. And if we don't stay in touch with that, we can make decisions from a product perspective or a strategy perspective that lend us down some things that might feel like really good ideas, but they're not actually useful for the end user. So even though many of you might have internal users, we also want to take a look at those external users, those end users for Fanatics. So what we want to get to here is that whatever your team is building, that's your product. If you're using Scrum as a framework for your team to become more agile, Scrum often talks about the term product owner. It's just another term for product management. You work in a product company. You are all in various stages of what that agility could look like and what your product looks like, but ultimately at the end, the product is whatever the team is building. So we just want to stress on that. And also a very big secret to building great products is being really engaged with our users. So one of the things that we stress a lot is really understanding about why we're doing what we're doing. Why are we building what we're building? So one of the things that Google found is that people need purpose. They need meaning and they need purpose. Work has to be personally important to team members. And it's up to our product leaders to help impart this, to really understand why we're doing what we're doing, because it helps us understand the pain points of our users. What the data tells us is that people are more apt to use our product or our service if it's solving a problem for them. So we really look to our product leaders to make that connection between what we're building, this product that we're building, and the users that we are building it for. So in a teaming agreement, an element of a teaming agreement is for us to get really in touch with our customers' pain points. One way to do that, we've got given a ton of different types of templates through the Fanatics way that are available for you. One of the things that you'll see highlighted there is the empathy mapping. This example of what I'm showing you on screen is just one example of a way to get really in touch with your users. This is an exercise that product managers can use to help the whole team understand sort of a day in life of the users. So I love this term, facilitate. Facilitate, if you look at the root word of facilitate, it means to make easy. And when a product leader can make it easy for us to understand the pain points, we can get in a lot more easier touch with the problems that our users are facing. So it doesn't matter if your users are internal to your company or external to your company. It helps us keep a focus on the bigger picture of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then, like all discovery efforts, if you've got user data, even better. Internally, you might have some customer service or some SLA types of surveys. You know, those are really important to understand where you're doing things, where you're strong, where you might need some challenges. But ultimately, you really need to understand your end user, right? Because if your end user stops buying Fanatics products, the whole company will start to suffer. So we want to always stay in touch with the end user of our product, not just the internal user, right? So as you can imagine, this empathy exercise shouldn't be done in a vacuum. Who might you want to make sure is at an exercise talking about users' pain points? Any ideas?
The user.
How about the user?
Please.
Fantastic. And it's really surprising sometimes. We start designing things around the table and we forget to leave our desk. So I know we're working in a digital sort of low-touch economy right now, but in some ways it might make it even easier to reach out to your users, to share screens, to shadow what they do, and to get some interviews and some observations that will help augment the knowledge of what you are working on with them. So consider that. We sometimes see buffers with account representatives or salespeople or, you know, some kind of proxy for the user. And so we're looking to remove all those barriers so that the team has access to the people whose problems that they're solving. The second canvas that we love to show off in the teaming agreement is the product canvas. Now, this is the one that we're showing on the screen. As a product leader, this is a great one-page tool to communicate an overview of the entire product. The secret sauce is that it's one page. You could have 45 pages of data and other informational stuff behind this one pager, but there's some magic about distilling the important conversations down to one page. We've borrowed this one from a product expert named Roman Pickler out of the UK. And in the courses, if you are a part of our Scrum 101 or some of the other training that's happening with the Fanatics way, we unpack some of these and some of those courses. This is a great tool to use when you have an understanding of who your users are. So we're presenting this today because more than likely, the majority of your work is spent working on products where you know who your users are. If you can get to this space, the product leaders usually facilitate, make easy this ability to communicate the vision and the strategy of the product, but they don't do it in a vacuum either. This is another great aspect where the users, your customers, can get involved and help build this out. One of the things that we have found is that as we move to Agile, sometimes developers are left out of the big picture. And we get increasingly complex with the worlds we live in, but it seems like we give them less and less of that big picture. So it's really ideal if we can make that big picture a picture. Think about using any kind of visuals to level set and bring in another way of looking at a system, a process, or a product that we're building, and not so much detail that we're solutioning, but just enough information to level set and set that strategy and vision. So leadership is one of those areas that Google recognizes as a pretty important element. And in our world, we look at that product manager or that product owner, that tech lead. We look to the leaders to provide some of that strategy and vision. This is probably the most ideal for a product manager to present, but that doesn't mean that a tech leader couldn't, particularly if you've got something that's a little bit more back-end oriented or technically focused. You might use other canvases, right? There's a bunch of other canvases out there. You might adapt this for your own use. The ultimate piece is that we're connecting the bigger picture with the people who are doing the work. And this is the chance to connect business management, the things that Fanatics is doing up here at a high level, all the way down to delivery management. So this is that in-between area, this product leader layer that connects what we want to do from a impact like revenue or outcomes all the way down to what are we doing as an engineer on a development team or on a data team. How do they connect? This is the tool that does that. There's a bunch of other canvases out there. If you are in a research and development side or innovation, you might look for lean UX canvases. There's something called the value proposition canvas. There's all kinds. So you almost can't do it wrong. It's just about having this intentional conversation so that you are setting the stage for that bigger picture. And then the last element that we want to highlight in the teaming agreement for the product and user side is we spend all this time on discovery, identifying the problem we want with our users, and then doing some vision and some value exercises to get to a point where we're pretty confident that we have something that's going to resonate with our users. That product canvas can illustrate that. And there's a great little technique that we use, which is part of the Fanatics way, called the definition of ready. Anybody heard of the definition of ready, or is anybody using a definition of ready? Great, we're just going to give you just enough information to get started. And we find this to be a pretty helpful tool when you're bridging that gap between idea and backlog. So if you're following a Scrum framework or Kanban, you might have some events called refinement. It's just the act of breaking big stuff down into small stuff. So it doesn't matter whether you're a back-end team, a front-end team, a feature team. At some point, if you want to work in a very rapid way and get something out there quickly and then get feedback on it quickly, you have to really focus on breaking big stuff down into very small little chunks, smaller and smaller and smaller. And we do this through the act of refinement. It's just the idea of, like, imagine a big boulder and you're chipping away at it, you're chipping it away at it so that you get a bunch of little rocks that you can solve, that you can start building a backlog out of. So the definition of ready, I'm showing you what I call the starter pack on the screen. The definition of ready, I would say, is the product owner's promise to the team that they can communicate what they want built and why they want built and how they're going to accept it. Not how it's going to be built, because that's the team's job, but how are they going to accept or reject this work? When would we know that this work is functionally done and operational? You might hear the term user story. That's a great way to write items in a backlog, especially if you're feature-based and you're working with, outside users. But regardless of what you call it, it's just the act of getting something from a product perspective to a point where we can say as a development team, we have enough to get started. For me, the litmus test on a definition of ready is that the team has enough to put some sizing on it. I might talk all day about something going from that idea to backlog, but then when I ask people about some sizing or some efforts related to it, then I get all kinds of much deeper questions. If my team can't size it, then I probably have to go back and do a little bit more detail in the refinement so that I can understand if I've met their major questions. Even if they can size it with some assumptions, I'm okay with that. Because what we're looking for in Agile is to get the conversation started. It's just enough to start, not enough to finish, because we do that finishing throughout the cycle of execution. So how does this intersect with the teaming agreement? Well, we're no longer writing these big, massive requirements. So we need some understanding at a team level about how much detail we need from a team to feel like we have enough to get started. And that can look very different for every team. Some team might need architecture and design standards fleshed out. Some team might have a heavier UX need that they need fleshed out. The big warning sign with the definition, and the reason I have this yellow flag here, is that you could go too far and too deep. So from a product leader perspective, one of the things you want to do is balance out what I want and how I'm going to validate it with that speed and with small chunks of getting stuff out there where it can be used and getting feedback from the user with the amount of detail that your team needs. So that's a constant conversation. You might start with a starter pack here, this little idea of some examples of the definition already, but constantly talk to your team if you're going too far, if you're not going far enough. And one of the efforts that we're focusing on in the Fanatics way is really how to mitigate dependencies. What we know about dependencies is by taking a look at things 2 and 3 cycles in advance, it helps us mitigate those dependencies. All right, so let's move on. We're going to start talking now about quality expectations, and I'm going to turn it over to Rob.
Yeah. So in Agile, cost and time are tied together with sustainable teams. Scrum is built with time boxes. It allows us to plan big, complex items with the promise of negotiating scope. But that leaves the one thing that is not negotiable, and that is quality. As much as Julie was talking about understanding the why and the customer expectations and how the users are going to use and need things, the other side of team expectations has to do with, does the team understand all of the technical and other inputs that need to go into making sure things are done? All right, in Agile, we frequently, in Scrum, we call that the definition of done. We don't want to rush this, because if we miss it, our quality is off. All right, so we're going to move on to Mentee again next. And what we're going to look at is some dimensions of understanding what needs to go into getting something done inside the organization, as well as the feasibility of the team being able to do it. And on there, you're going to just put a rating on there of how important either the understanding or the feasibility is for what you're aware of for architecture, quality standards, security standards, UX design, acceptance criteria, right? And in your organization, there may be even be other ones that aren't even on there. So just go ahead and take the sliders and just kind of give it a rating for your world and what you know for those elements. So what we expected to see there is exactly what happened. Really, there are things that should be in that upper right-hand corner from the team needing an understanding of it and the team also knowing the feasibility of how to complete it. Those are all things that in every organization, there's going to be varying levels. There may be others, but it's really important to get those up into the upper right-hand quadrant. Next slide. Yeah. So as we transition, every PBI item, as it goes through refinement, as it goes through a team, gets acceptance criteria. So if we have all this information and acceptance criteria that tells us how to verify the PBI item we're working on, then how is that different, or why do we need a definition of done? All right, so let's talk briefly just about the difference. Acceptance criteria, it's the functional requirements. It's specifically about the PBI item. It describes how to verify that that work on the PBI level was done. Definition of done, however, talks more about the system standards, the architecture standards, the process standards, and the types of work it takes to move that into larger environments or to complete the work globally within a development or technology system. Think a definition of done as a global checklist that can be applied to all of the work that the team is working on versus the individual story. It covers all of those standards. Its items or that checklist should be common knowledge and common practice that's expected from all the team members on the team working on it. Everybody is accountable for making sure that's done. It also touches how the team does refinement and estimation, right? Because if we don't understand that, then if refinement and estimation isn't really going to be meant to meet those standards. So let's take a broader look of how definition of done fits in with the bigger picture. Right? So if you think of everything it takes in an organization, right? One of the things we always hear is we want predictability, right? We want to scope out the work. We want to define what the features are. We want to define what the PBI items are. But we also need to know, as you're working, predictability, right? So we can have that communication between execution and business to get the timing right. And if you look at all the things that go into that chain, from getting to done to be able to establish predictability, definition of done is somewhere right there in the middle. You have those standards, dependency management, the definition of ready, right, on the left-hand side of it, which triggers the team's ability to do estimation and sizing, to do the planning, to do the execution, to establish velocity, right? So if we think of that in the context of one big chain, what do you think would happen if that chain had a break in it? Right, so if something to the left of that or the definition of done was off, what happens to our ability for predictability? Any thoughts?
That breaks as well.
That breaks as well, yeah. Yeah, well, any speculation as to why it breaks? So want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, you know, if something moves that you have a dependency on for your prediction, it's going to move your prediction.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So up until this point in time where the team is defining the definition done, we've talked about the business, we talked about the empathy map, we've talked about the vision, we got into architectural standards and making sure the team's clear on that. So everything to the left of that, anywhere in this chain, right, that's going to throw that off. So this is one of those things with teaming agreements. We actually don't want to rush, right? Make sure it's good. Because what happens when we rush, Joy, if you want to hit the next slide, you know, without clarity, what we get is all sorts of other definitions of done, right? The team sort of kind of goes up with their own, right? We get done, we get capital D done, really done, undone, redone, done again, done a second time, done later, development done. And really, when we're talking about agile teams or working in an agile way, we want to focus on making sure that we have a really crisp definition of what it actually means to get done. Because what's all this stuff that happens later, right? This is technical debt or a form of technical debt that goes in the backlog. It increases scope, it increases rework, it slows down velocity, it slows down our predictability. So being really crisp on what done means is critically important. Let's move ahead to the next one. Definition of done starts with the team getting aligned on the right inputs. All right, so a couple of things you should consider when crafting the definition of done is taking a look at the coding standards. Does the team itself have a clear understanding of them? Are there any security needs, quality needs, DevOps and operations? How does that fit into the mix for what the team needs to know? Governance, audit, compliance, things along those natures. Think outside of just product owner and development team. What does the team need to estimate, break down, work on? In simple environments, that's pretty straightforward. But if you have complex software environments, a good way of approaching this is maybe breaking the definition of done down into sections. You know, describing story at a done level, sprint at a done level, release and deployment at a done level. And the key takeaway on that is understanding if there's anything there that you would need to anything there that you would need to defer to get the code production ready, right? So, you know, deployments at that point should be easy. So if you think about it in a sports analogy, a ball was within inches of a goal line. Most pro athletes, their careers can be made or broke from coming up with a key play like this, right? Either they get it over the goal line or they're always going to be remembered for getting it a couple inches to the goal line and failing, right? So when you're thinking about the definition of done, you want to get really clear on what is the difference between done and released, right? Specifically, what is the destination environment that the team or all the teams are working on, right? And do they understand, is there any gap between that and actually getting it deployed and released to the customer, right? And then if there is any gap, how does that work as an organization or a team going to get represented in the backlog and re-estimate it So when we're talking about dates and predictability, are we actually basing that on real information, right? That's work that tends to get hidden in organizations and surprises organizations when they're getting ready to hit the gas pedal or make a push to get that ball over the line. All right, and it's worth the time to invest in that intentionally upfront to be able to do that, so it's not unexpected. All right. Also, you want to get business and make sure there's representation from technology involved in that conversation. In the absence of that participation, teams make it up. They do the best they can. So we want to make sure they're getting fed from the business side and those that are holding the technical standards when they're doing that, so there's clarity to it, right? They don't have to figure it out for themselves. So if you want to get started on the definition of done, right, there's no better time like the present. It can be created during a retro. It can be created during the first sprint. The main point I wanted to make here is that it is a living, breathing document. The organization is going to evolve, and the team is going to evolve. So when that happens, the team should be willing to open that back up and make corrections and adjustment to it as they learn and they adapt. When teams are just starting out, I usually say make it a point to review it during the first couple of sprints and make any changes as you go, just to get in the habit of doing that. It's always complete. It's always emerging.
So just checking in with some of those elements from Project Aristotle that Google really explored for us. We've talked about how teams need to understand their mission and their purpose. We've talked about the role of the leader helping to set that strategy and vision. And now the definition of done, it really starts to build out that autonomy, that ability to own what they can do and end up being a dependable team. Right? We're setting them up for success so they can do the things that they say they're going to do. So there's another element of this when we're really diving in and understanding all of those elements of the teaming agreement. They found that the teams who had the strongest team norms really came to the surface. And so let's just pause here. Think about a team that you've worked on. Think about some of the things that you felt made it a team that was a great team. What are some of the elements that you experienced? How would you describe that? So we'll just go back to Mentee, and you could put in a few words that describe working on a great team. What made it great?
Autonomy and ownership, nice. Gregarious. I don't know if I've ever seen gregarious on one of these before. It's a fantastic word.
So the extroverts unite there. Shared purpose, I love it. So you guys get it. It might be hard to describe, but when you've been on it, when you've experienced it, it's pretty evident. And so you know when it exists. So if you're not quite there yet, or if you have a new team and you want to go a little further with your teaming agreement, just keep all of that in mind. And when you dive into these conversations, you might go a little bit deeper or push a little bit more so that you really get to the elements that people care about.
Yeah.
So
what's interesting, I'll say, Joy, quick thing call out is one of the things that's interesting is I don't see any of the quote unquote on paper skills on there, right? It's not about technical. These are all other skills that you can't track on paper with people. These are dynamics that are under the current of forming a team that make a team great. So when forming a team, take note of where we want to invest.
So just going further, what they found when we're talking about what are the norms that matter most, you guys touched on it. One is this mutual respect, this social awareness that we have from each other. And the other, surprisingly, I found it surprising, was that at the end of the day, when they examined teams that were performing at a pretty highly effective way by all measures, they found that teammates roughly talked about the same amount of time. Now, isn't that interesting? Particularly when we've moved to a digital economy, we have so much more work happening virtually. Perhaps if you were used to working face-to-face, you would think that technology could help you with that communication. But sometimes we find technology can hinder us. But those two things, having this social sensitivity to each other and being able to have a voice and an equal voice, were the two norms that really rose to the surface as some of the most important things that a team could build. So how do we get there? we like to present that in business, it's not just business, it is personal. Think about starting with something like this personal canvas. I like to send these beforehand, before a teaming agreement session, so that people can be thoughtful and responsive about what they put. If I have introverts on the team, which is highly likely in a software development world, I want to give them some time to think about these things. What it does is that it starts painting a picture of how we like to work by understanding more about the people that we're working with. And I think this is really critical when you have a distributed team. Then one of the things that is really important is understanding that teams now who are working in what we call thought work, once you take money off the table and competitive salaries are just a part of being satisfied at work, the triggers that make people really enjoy their work are three things that Daniel Pink in his work Drive have come up with: purpose, autonomy, and mastery. So very, very much in line with where the Google studies went. People need to understand what they're working on and why they're doing it. They need to be able to figure out the how. That's one of the great things about Agile frameworks is it really separates the what and the why from the how. And we have to give them time to really hone their craft.
So if we start out with a study that was done in the Harvard Business Review, fairly recently ago, they found that the time spent with managers and employees in collaborative activities has increased by 50% or more over the last 2 decades. And that at many of those companies, 3/4 of the employees' day was spent communicating with colleagues, right? And in Agile, we also see an uptick in the amount of collaboration and the amount of interaction we have to have people doing, right? So we want to start out well when we're forming those teams. And just as we kind of discussed, as Julie was just talking about in that personal canvas, everybody comes to a team with those expectations, right? How to operate as a team, what do they value? How do they operate successfully? And they all bring those preconceived norms with them. And one of the things that we want to make sure we're shepherding the right way with those teams is getting from those individual personal norms to tribal and team norms, right? And one of the ways that we can achieve that is to start working on, start calling out and building a team norm or team canvas around what those things are doing. So up here on the screen, we have things kind of just laid out in a mind map format. But to give you an example of some of the things that are on there, right? There's a section for values, section for tools, section for hours and working hours, and then kind of a miscellaneous what else comment. But if you look at some of those things out there on the fringes, right, you can see where if the team doesn't have one unified approach for what these norms should be, or at least an agreement of how they're going to work together around those norms, it's going to cause some problems and complexities as the team starts forming and getting up to speed. And as Julie pointed out earlier, the more we invest in helping the team get through these in the beginning, the faster they're going to get to be able to a high-performing, high-quality team where the deliverables are coming out at a better pace. All right, and that particularly can get interesting if we're dealing with remote teams, right? So whether you have a team that is fully remote or you have one individual working on a team that is remote, I tend to consider from a coaching perspective that team is a remote team, and that remote is that team's primary co-location space, right? And when you're dealing with that, you have to take a look at all the cultural, language, time zone, and communication issues that go into forming a team around that remote co-location space and making sure it's balanced and effective for all the team members. So when we're talking about the working agreement or the team norms, there's a couple of call outs that I wanted to make that are just a little more important to cover than it would be with an on-prem team. Specifically, setting time around community time or team time on camera, right? Does the team have common working hours where they all agree to be within a portion of the day to all be present, all be on camera, all be available to collaborate together as a team? The flip side of that is you can't be on camera all the time. So where does the team want to set private working hours where it's okay to be off camera and go specifically focus on getting stuff done? And as they're going through that, how do we want to handle communication and raising your hand and asking for help either during those common working hours or during those private hours, right? We want to make sure that there's still that availability and that spirit of helping the team. not having a stable conference collaboration or digital whiteboard technology will also slow a team down if they're remote. So making sure that there's a lot of focus and emphasis on easing those collaboration tools that where somebody would normally pull up to a whiteboard on a wall, to make sure that those tools are available and that they're actually useful to the team. Getting that feedback from the team that these tools are actually useful and helpful. Alignment on communication. You know, it actually, I'd say some people say that you have to make sure that it's done. I actually want to say that when it talks about communication norms for the team, you actually want to be somewhat overdone. Taking it a little bit to extreme, just to make sure that there's good communication channels inside of the team and also in and out of the team, and that it's seen as something with a priority. And then finally, when it comes to global teams, retrospectives. A standard in my coaching practice, especially with remote teams, is that a remote team that's operating fully remote should actually dedicate a small amount of percentage of their retrospective time in the beginning, focusing on how well does what we have tooling and otherwise in our norms working remotely actually working, right? Make it a focal point inside the retrospective so they can figure out how to improve that early. Finally, just before closing out on it, building team culture into remote teams. We often don't think about it. It all becomes about the work. But there's nothing that replaces that social interaction. And you have to replicate that when working remotely, right? Coffee hour, happy hour, water cooler, right? Some intentionality behind creating spaces for the team to come together socially and not just about work, to reinforce those personal norms, values, and everything that we had at the beginning.
Okay, so we've unpacked a number of canvases. We like those canvases because they give you structured conversations. If you've got a pretty traditional team, if you've got like a traditional Scrum team, like a product owner and a Scrum master, it sort of lends itself to facilitation and time boxing, but you don't have to be Scrum in order to do those, right? They're just using those canvases, those one-pagers, and using some time boxes, and then walking through each of those elements lends itself to the design thinking elements that we find so prevalent in Agile, and just this ability to visualize things in order for others to critique our thinking. So keep that in mind as you go forward. I know DJ's got decks on the canvases, but we're also very happy to unpack more. We can send you some other resources if you need. If you're struggling with one, we can perhaps suggest some others. The last element before we move into the last couple minutes is, don't forget to sit down and have an intentional conversation, wrapping up all those team norms with how it intersects with your events. Particularly if you're a Scrum team and you're practicing that radical collaboration, you know, closing that psychological distance and making that teaming environment, you really want to be intentional about what those overlapping hours are that Rob was talking about. What are the core hours? What are the hours where people are working independently? So just keep that in mind, and you might take something like this chart and flesh it out together so that you're talking together about when those events can be done and how you can bridge things like time zone differences. You know, use your Scrum events, some of them which can take several hours, how you can break that up when you've got a wide difference in geographic locations and time zones. So don't try to do any of those in a vacuum. Get your team together to talk about what they can commit to. DJ, anything you want to add to this area?
Nope. I would just, yeah, just one thing, the suggestions only at the bottom. Again, this is meant to be a framework. So use what works for you and you know, don't for the stuff that doesn't seem to work. Again, we want to be flexible enough to allow you to adapt this to what works best for you and your teams.
All right, so we've talked a number of times about these are living, breathing documents. They're meant to be refreshed. They're meant to have a purpose. One of the great things about the Agile manifesto mindset is really talks about not just having documentation for documentation's sake, but to have useful information. So consider if somebody's onboarding to your team, what do they need to know to understand how this team works? If they're onboarding onto your product, what do they need to know to be successful delivering? How are you going to help them as really strong, high-performing teams really understand that purpose, mastery, and autonomy, right? We all have a very big part to play in building that out. So one of the things that we really suggest you do is bring it up on a regular basis to inspect and adapt.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and just open up the mic from a discussion standpoint. Would like to hear kind of just your thoughts, your input, what you've seen on these. Just for example, to start with a question, right? So who do you think is the custodian, or who owns the teaming agreements?
Product manager.
Product manager. Is there another answer?
The team.
The team in general.
The team in general. There we go. That's the one I was looking for. Right. Especially in my coaching practice, that's really, I want the team to have a sense of ownership, that while some of the expectations and standards come from the organization as a whole, the agreement of the team for how they work together is theirs, right? And the accountability to each other is within the team. What about updating team agreements? Any thoughts? Are they set in stone? What and how could they be updated?
Update them as needed. Find something's not working, change it.
Yeah, update them as needed. Find something. So, how does a team know when they need to be updated, though?
When they're not performing as expected.
Yeah, not performing as expected, or friction. I like to say friction between what they have in their agreement doesn't necessarily gel with how the team is operating these days, right? And that could either need to be a change in behavior on the team or an update to the agreement itself. So great. Any other insights on those or thoughts? If somebody holding back on a piece of insight there, or on almost said?
Little pro tip that Rob shared with me is just adding something in his calendar to give himself a reminder to refresh teaming agreements. I love that. I added that to my own calendar with my own team.
It's one of those days, Julie, when you forget your own pro tip. Yeah, absolutely. As a coach and an agile leader, there are certain things I put on a calendar. We want the teaming agreement to be in front of the team should be aware of it. They should know about it. It should be visible to the team, either on a wiki or their team board or their team space. And periodically, like a definition of done or anything else, should come out in the open, and the team should reevaluate it, right? These are living, breathing documents that the team should just be aware of all the time, and let it guide the team and let them change things in the team. All right. So one of the things here that we will often do just as a conclusion of all these things is start putting things together in one team canvas. And if you look at the one that's just up there as an example, sure, there's the one thing that everyone ends up with, right? What's our team name and team motto? But if you look at the other elements on there, right, we have our roles, our people, their motivators, their strengths, things that came out of the personal canvas. We have the values, things that came out of the norms. We have our purpose and goals, right? It comes out of it. Some of the product stuff can even creep into there. But the purpose of this is to be a big visual collaborative thing for the team to do. This is putting all those pieces together into one final commitment agreement for the team. All our hands in together, go team. We're going to go. This is how we're going to operate. This is us. And it can also be used for change, right? Kind of as we saw earlier. So just lots of value in going through the exercise of taking those pieces and putting it together. Joy, anything else to add? You wanted to add on that?
One of the things I want to say, if you already have a team name and a team motto, it's interesting if you go through these exercises, if you actually revisit the team name and the team motto, because sometimes we pick fun team names or silly team names, but after you go through this multi-dimensional teaming agreement, it could take several different sessions to get there. The team may have a really different understanding of their own climate within their team. And just I set the scenario that consider that somebody wants to join your team a year from now. What do you want them to know about you? What is that thing that brings your competitive advantage to the table? And it often really shifts the focus to some of those more intrinsic values that we were talking about, the things that they care about. So you get a flavor for how the team really likes to work and what motivates them in ways that maybe are not as obvious.
Yeah, why I like sticky teams and teams that stay together, performing teams, that whole, if any of the dynamics on the team change, one, how does that team member come up to speed? And two, how do we start incorporating their values also into this and enrolling them into the team agreement, right? Sometimes it's dramatic and drastic, and sometimes it's just some additions.
One thing we really want to stay away from are these big, long documentation that nobody looks at. So if it's too long, if it's too big, and they don't remember it, then it's not going to be effective. It just becomes waste, just becomes either marketing fluff, or it's so tactical there isn't any autonomy around what they're doing. So find that balance. Sometimes we think of some really elementary things that we put in our teaming agreements, and after we have some practice doing it, it seems pretty obvious, pretty elementary. Maybe that one goes off the teaming agreement and something else comes on. Somebody mentioned this, if your team's not working the way that we expect or the way that we like, it's a great conversation to bring up, and maybe we put some of those elementary things back on. It's a little different when you are online than you are when you're face-to-face, but there's still some behaviors that can become very obvious, even online. And so the conversations might look different, but they are just as critical, if not more, since we don't have that ability to have those sort of, coffee room chats and things like that. So keep that in mind. I know DJ has a number of them posted out on the Fanatics Way website. If you go out and look to the Fanatics Way wiki, underneath artifacts, you can search for the teaming agreements. You can also see examples of other teams' definitions of ready and definitions of done. It goes into more detail there, but that's a nice way to bring up what's working with other teams. Maybe it's a way to help you encourage your teams to go further, or to inspire them if it's new for them. Sometimes seeing other people's work helps inspire them to do something else. Anything you want to add from the Fanatics Way perspective, DJ?
No, yes, we will be adding a couple of these canvases that Julie shown. So like the empathy map, the product canvases, and the personal canvases, those currently aren't on the site, but we will be updating to include those. And yes, we have about 7 examples of teams' actual teaming agreements that do include definition ready, definition done. So again, I would encourage folks to look at those, and thank you to those folks who have volunteered yourselves to allow those to be examples.
Let's see if we could just go back to Mentee and ask you, we'll see if it cooperates. What was your favorite part of this webinar? We'd like to make sure you get the right resources that help you if there's something that caught your attention that you feel like you can take away, maybe something that surprised you that was new. We'd love to hear about it. You can also give more feedback to DJ, and he does a great job of sending out surveys that gives us good details on how we can improve in the future as well. Great. Well, we thank you very much. So just to give you an idea, and this will be in the recording, I'll add David's stuff to this. There's that link to Project Aristotle. You can do other searches for similar things. We've just found that to be really, really relevant. You can stay in touch with us. Love to hear more about what's working for you, and also reach out to DJ if there's anything that we can do to help support your journey. We're always delighted to spend time with Fanatics people. We have a lot of fun with you.
Mm-hmm.